Desmond Tutu, Nobel Prize winner, Archbishop Emeritus, international voice for peace, racial equality, and reconciliation, and the inspiration for a new academic center in Indianapolis designed to be an incubator for social justice. Butler University and Christian Theological Seminary created the Desmond Tutu Center to honor the Archbishop Emeritus's legacy of justice and reconciliation. In 1978, Desmond Tutu was named General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches and became a leading spokesperson for the rights of black South Africans. During the 1980s, he helped lead the anti-apartheid movement, and in 1984, he won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. The Desmond Tutu Center at Butler University and Christian Theological Seminary will focus on leadership development in social justice and reconciliation, international relationships, and interreligious bridge building. South African cleric and anti-apartheid activist Alan Boesak will serve as the center's first director. The presidents of Butler University and Christian Theological Seminary say the neighboring schools are currently exploring several opportunities to collaborate academically. The announcement of the new center was made at Butler's Clues Hall in front of a sold-out crowd of 2,100 people. The Archbishop Emeritus was on hand for the honor and spoke to the crowd.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Wasima Ali, and I am the Administrative Director of the Desmond Tutu Center for Peace, Reconciliation, and Global Justice. On behalf of Butler University and the Christian Theological Seminary, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today on our talk, What All Americans Need to Know About ISIS, with Dr. David Carlson and Ms. Ayesha Butt. Last October, through my affiliation with the Center for Interfaith Cooperation and my membership in the Muslim community, I met two very beautiful people, Ed and Paula Kazig, two of the most caring, loving, and brave people I have ever met. It was no surprise that their son, Peter Kazig, was equally, if conceivably, more loving, caring, and courageous. I recall sitting in the living room of the humble Syrian home where I met these individuals. I saw so many examples between the way Peter lived his life and what I knew from Islamic teachings and the prophetic example. He embodied selflessness and God's command to serve better than anyone I have ever met, or I guess I should say wanted to meet. Alas, that opportunity was taken from all of us when his captors, ISIS, decided to end his life. His life was not the only one that was prematurely taken. Words that I heard just last week on NPR, words of Kyla Mueller, will remain with me. She said, "Peace cannot just be asked, it must be made." I appreciate my role at the Desmond Tutu Center, where we use that very approach to understand the world around us. We ask ourselves, what can we offer this world in the face of a crisis? We know that different situations will merit different responses, but at the end, the prerequisite level for any effective response is a base of knowledge. At a time where it seems that every breaking story will be the bearer of bad news, and every tragedy will be compounded by yet another tragedy, how can one unburden the mind and calm the soul? In the words of our genius, Albert Einstein, who said, "Anyone can know, but the point is to understand." We all know about ISIS, but maybe the point here is to understand their ideology in order to generate an effective response. ISIS not only poses a threat to the United States and the whole world, but also to the collective perspective of the religion of Islam. Today, Dr. David Carlson will offer some insight on what might have created the environment for ISIS to grow, and Ms. Ayesha Butt will provide a Muslim perspective rooted in Islamic law. Dr. Carlson will speak first, followed by Ms. Ayesha Butt, followed by a question and answer session, so please hold any questions you have. Dr. David Carlson is a professor of philosophy and religion at Franklin College. In 2011, Dr. Carlson published Peace Be With You, Monastic Wisdom for a Terror-Filled World, which received a starred review from both Publishers Weekly and Library Journal. This book is on sale out here at the end of this talk for $15.99. The book was selected as one of the 10 best books in 2011 in the category of Spiritual Living by Library Journal. Dr. Carlson has also authored several and published several articles and in December 2014 completed his most recent book, Countering ISIL, The Power of Spiritual Friendships. He is the founder of Shoulder to Shoulder, an Interfaith Witness, a movement begun in 2012 that is committed to grieving and witnessing publicly whenever religion is abused for violent purposes. Dr. Carlson is also a frequent speaker, radio and TV interview subject on the topic of religious violence and, more recently, the rise of ISIL. Dr. Carlson holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Wheaton College, a bachelor's degree in biblical studies from the American Baptist Seminary of West California, and his doctorate degree in New Testament from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. In addition, he has conducted postdoctoral studies at Duke University on a National Endowment for the Humanities grant and at Indiana University. Ms. Ayesha Butt is an associate instructor in the Department of Religious Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington, and a former adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at St. Joseph's University. She is currently pursuing her doctorate at Indiana University's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. She has taught courses that cover subjects pertaining to Islamic history, the rights of Muslim women in Islam, Islamic law, and the beliefs and practices of different denominations in Islam. Amongst her many achievements, she has made an appearance on Good Morning America, is a critical language scholarship alum, and has spoken at many colleges, universities, places of worship, and interfaith events. Before we hear from our esteemed speakers, I would like to request Dr. Alan Buzak to please join me on stage. Dr. Buzak is the executive director and the chair of the Desmond Tutu Center. He is a theologian, humanitarian, prolific author, and tireless advocate for social justice. For his full bio and accomplishments, please visit our website, www.desmondtutucenter.org. With that, I would like to kindly ask that you please silence your phones and welcome Dr. Alan Buzak.
Thank you, Wasima. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here tonight to welcome and listen to our two very distinguished speakers. It is a great privilege to have you here on the campus of Christian Theological Seminary, where the Desmond Tutu Center is housed as a joint venture between this institution and Butler University. We want to raise those situations and subjects that are crucial for us to understand. We want to raise those questions that might be difficult, but nonetheless, the questions that we have to deal with. And tonight's discussion is about such a question and such a situation in the world. We know that we cannot depend mainly on mainstream media to give us the information that we need. We need to dig deeper. We need to ask the questions behind the questions. We need to raise the issues that on the media they refuse for some reason or another to raise, or when they do raise them, they handle them so superficially that we come away sometimes more confused than when we went to sit down and listen. Tonight is an opportunity to listen to two speakers who are well-versed in this topic, who want to share with us their wisdom and their experience and their insights. And I hope that you will engage them in the kind of honest and real conversation that the Desmond Tutu Center hopes we will be able to do more than once. Tonight is one of the first evenings that we have this kind of dialogue. Next week, Tuesday evening, we will continue with our reconciliation series for this year. And Thursday, we have another conversation. So you see, Wasima keeps us quite busy around these issues. But for tonight, please feel very, very welcome. It is a great pleasure to have you here. I hope you, together with all of us, will enjoy this evening. And let's have one more round of applause for our two distinguished speakers.
Thank you for this invitation to be here this evening. The weather being what it was, I was uncertain whether it would be the two of us and Wasima, but I I see that the topic, as I think we have discovered in the last year, is one that has the concern of so many people, not just in this country, but elsewhere as well. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to be at the Desmond Tutu Center, and I love the full title of it, the Desmond Tutu Center for Peace, Reconciliation, and Global Justice. And so if we only discuss ISIS, ISIL from a military perspective, we are missing what this center is about, and we are missing what we need to be talking about and thinking about. I want to thank Wasima Ali, the administrative director of the center. I want to thank Ann Enger, the program director, who was so helpful, Marilyn from the bookstore, who was helping later, and Joshua Brainard, who I met at Earlham School of Religion Writers Conference, and he was the one that suggested I might come and offer this talk. I think it's fair to say that 1 year ago, few of us would have expected to be here. That is also true of me. Despite the fact that ISIL has been in existence since 2006, formally, I had heard so little about this group that I seriously contemplated dropping the topic of a course on religion and violence that I've been teaching for the past decade. That was last April, not that long ago. Then ISIL's successes came fast and furious in the news, and I realized that my study of religion and violence was now having a new chapter, and I needed to pursue this topic. I began to read everything I could. I began to watch everything I could. I felt that I was probably watching things that a lot of Americans were turning off the TV set because it's so unpleasant. But I felt it was important for me to put what I understood from my coursework and from the books that I've written, see if I could relate that to what was happening, if it would be helpful for the culture for me to do that. As you know, developments are happening very rapidly. Just this past week, on Tuesday, ISIL began a major offensive against the Kurdish town of Erbil in northern Iraq. Earlier in the week, President Obama announced a 3-year plan, wanted War Powers Act, 3-year plan to contain, if not degrade, ISIL. The 3-year commitment is not meant to suggest that the problem will be solved in that amount of time. Rather, President Obama wanted to make it clear that ISIL would be the next president's concern as well. And earlier in this story that we're following, he thought it would probably be a couple presidencies down the road. Others have suggested 50-year campaign. Not what we like to hear as a war-weary country. The truth is that no one can say when and where this story will end. My promise, however, is this. I have 47 minutes, according to the timeline, to help us understand the origins, the rage, the vision, and the attitude of the Islamic State toward the West and toward our country in particular. I do not promise in 47 minutes to take away all your fears. Perhaps we will see our fear, however, in a larger context and understand it. Before I start, I want to thank Wasima for honoring Peter Kasich in her opening remarks. We have not forgotten Peter, and his family have remained a living witness of the power of grace in grief as well as forgiveness. And it's been a real honor to get to know them under these horrible circumstances. I want to also give a special welcome to American Muslims who are here for this presentation. They have suffered the most in this past year, and it's been a very trying time. I know from my Muslim friends as they have felt the pressure of this group and the pressure to speak out and they have. Unfortunately, not the major networks often cover their speaking out. Before I came this afternoon, I was watching a wonderful presentation on television by some leaders in Minneapolis from the Somali community. As you know, that community has had a number of young people recruited and has left for the region to fight with ISIL. And I was listening to these imams from St. Paul, Minneapolis area, and I was listening to the police that they've been working with for the past 6 years, and I thought, this is exactly what we need to be hearing, that there are people that have a really interesting plan for how to, effective plan, I think, for how to deal with this. But you would not be surprised if I told you that this was happening only on C-SPAN, and that is not a highly watched network. And so why it's not on other networks, I would encourage you to ask your own local affiliates. Okay. All right, we're going to start, and I'm going to start with something kind of controversial for Americans, and that is we're going to look at ancient history, which Americans aren't particularly excited about looking at. But I wanted you to see a map of the early Islamic empire. The darkest color is the extent of that empire when the Prophet Muhammad died. The furthest extension is only 80 years afterwards. In other words, the rise of Islam and the spread of Islam was dramatic, the fastest of any religion in the history of the world. And so the reason I suggest we start with this is that we must recognize that within many Islamist groups, there is the sense that the past was glorious, and was glorious because God was in charge, and that they are interested in returning to a time of such glory again. Here's the Ottoman Empire at its furthest extent. I put down here in the bottom left the greatest extent of the empire, and then I put the plight of Arabs. The Ottomans were Turkish. Iranians are Persian. And in the middle between them is the Arab community. And the Arab community suffered under the Ottoman rule. It was considered second class, and it, as we'll see in a couple minutes, that was exploited by Europe. The Sunnis and Shia are frequently misunderstood by people in America. We don't quite grasp the difference, and that's really been unfortunate. So just very briefly, we're talking about, for the Sunnis, the Caliph is the leader of the community called the Ummah. They make up 85% of the Muslims of the world. They believe that Prophet Muhammad's wish was that the community would choose the leader after him. The Sunnis, as we'll see, 15% of the global Islamic community do not recognize that understanding. They believe that the Prophet Muhammad wanted a descendant of his to be the leader of the community. What's important, I think, it was kind of a small story, but in June of this past summer, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIL, declared himself Caliph. There had not been a Caliph since 1923. And I don't think that probably made headlines in the United States, but we now know, just from the past couple of weeks, that the response of various groups in Yemen, in Libya, and in Egypt, and now Pakistan and Afghanistan, they were affected by this declaration, and they saw it as a call to join the movement. So that was an important event, and I know Ms. Butt's going to talk more about that. Here's something I think I just covered, so we'll cut that, go through that. The Ottoman Empire in 1913, 100 years ago, is a very important kind of watershed. The Ottoman Empire, in its history, was gradually weakened going into the 19th, 20th century. The leadership wasn't as strong. Europe made some gains against them. As we look at sort of the beginning of the World War I period, a couple years before, we can see that the empire is still significant on the world map, controlling all of Turkey, Arab lands in here, on down into Saudi Arabia. There was a deal that was proposed to the Arab peoples in World War I. The Ottomans made the mistake of aligning themselves with the Germans, and therefore were on the losing side. The French and the British were interested in the Arabs revolting against the Ottomans and weakening them during the World War I campaign. What was implicitly promised was if they did so, the Arab peoples would have a nation of their own following World War I. Unbeknownst to them, there was a secret agreement made between the British and the French, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which divided the area, did not give the area to Arabs, but in a sense created the map that we see next. This is a map that we're familiar with. This is a carving up of this same area by the European powers for their purposes of colonization and influence, particularly over the oil reserves. So one of the things that we're going to emphasize this evening is that we're not going to understand the rage of Al-Qaeda and ISIL unless we understand that they've had an experience of humiliation repeatedly from Europe, and that humiliation is now coming out for us to see. You can see that this region ends up looking a little bit like a map of Europe. Surprise, surprise. Europe created the Middle East in its own design. The French wanted to have control over Syria and Lebanon, wanted to have an influence there, and the British had the influence over Iraq and Jordan and Palestine at that time. There was also a mentality that surfaced in the European experience that Edward Said, the Islamic scholar, has called Orientalism. It was the assumption by those colonizing in this area that the European powers found Islamic culture and religion and society to be exotic on the one hand, but inferior and backward on the other when compared to Europe. This is a form of what I call cultural humiliation, which went along with the physical carving up of that map. The aspirations of the Arab people to create a unified state took one form in 1958 to 1962. You might remember the United Arab Republic, which was a strange bringing together of two countries that are not that close together, Syria and Egypt, to declare themselves to be one reality. I think the way I'd like us to think about this is that this was an attempt to remove the humiliation of the map that we just looked at. And I'm borrowing here off of Jessica Stern's book, Terror in the Name of God, in which she has a very important chapter on the power of humiliation and the action that she calls dehumiliation, which is a culture's response to feeling humiliated, and they're going to do something to try to remove that humiliation. This will be a major theme, as I understand this region, a desire for dehumiliation. The Iranian Revolution, as you might remember, took the world by surprise. It took the Soviet Union by surprise. It took the United States by surprise. We had supported, that is, we, the United States, had supported the Shah. We had put him back into power when he was, in a sense, thrown out by his own people. We supported the Shah with his secret police force that tortured people. And so in 1978-79, the Ayatollah Khomeini, in exile in Paris, returns. I will never forget the scene of his return to Tehran and just the millions of people in the street. and the Shah was gone, and he was going to head this theocracy, this rule by God. And then, as we'll see, this is Iran is a Shia country. I have humiliation, dehumiliation, and humiliation again, just to quickly remind us that the period of the Shah, when even a president like Jimmy Carter said he's our best friend in the Middle East, then with the overthrow of the Shah and the coming of the Ayatollah Khomeini, and then the taking of American hostages at the embassy, this was an act of dehumiliation. This was an act of standing up to the historic humiliation that they had felt. What then happened was that with our support, Iraq and Iran got into a conflict in which the United States supported Saddam Hussein against the Iranian people, against the Iranian state, in an attempt to bring down the Ayatollah's government. In that conflict, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons against the Iranian soldiers, and many of them were just boys. And we turned the other way. I'm talking about the United States. We just turned the other way during that period. So if we are struggling today, as we are in the news, with is Iran, the United States, and the other nations going to work out a nuclear agreement, I think we have to bear in mind that there's a lot of distrust for the American experience that Iran has had. I actually find it quite surprising that Iranian people are, when they're interviewed, they say, we have nothing against American people, but the American foreign policy we have big problems with. And that's a level of graciousness that I'm impressed with. This map helps us look at the difference between the red is countries where the Shia are in the majority, and the tan and other is when the Sunnis are in control. There's Iraq. And what is a little misleading by this is that it's in red, but please, let's remember that during Saddam Hussein's reign, the Ba'athist Party, those were Sunnis that were then in control of a majority Shia nation, and that's going to be a major factor to explaining where ISIL is coming from, what their goals are, and where their rage is coming from. So we have a Shia nation here. We have a Shia majority, but controlled by Sunnis all around, including over in Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, some Shia down here in Yemen, and there's a little tick there for Lebanon, which, as we'll see in a minute, has a Shia influence now that's significant. And the war in Lebanon, which is right next to Syria and is often drawn into that conflict, at one time there was a Christian presence that was quite significant, including in the government, but it has decreased from 29 to 16%. Filling the vacuum is a group called Hezbollah that we've heard of before, and Hezbollah is associated and is a branch of the Shia community. I interviewed, for the book that's out there, I interviewed some of the leaders of a certain project up at St. John's Monastery in Minnesota. They are a group that has a mission of preserving ancient texts. And one of the monks had spent a lot of time in Lebanon with the Christian community, racing the clock, because the war was, not only people get destroyed in war, but documents get destroyed in war, and texts get destroyed in war as well. And so the monks from St. John's were busy photographing, digitally recording these priceless manuscripts. In my interview with him, I asked him a couple questions in which he then revealed that he had not talked to one Lebanese Christian person who did not feel that it was wise to stay there. They all felt they should go because their children would have no opportunities there. So there was a real feeling of discouragement in Lebanon and for the Christian presence. I ran across I got one of those free textbooks somewhere back in 1989, and I found it on my bookshelf. And I thought, I'm just going to see what they were saying about this region. Of course, it was post the Iranian Revolution, but it was prior, obviously, to 9/11. And so the very reputable scholar had written, the price of this post-World War I nationalism, that's that map with all the carving up by Europe, has been the breakup of the worldwide unity of Islam. And in the modern world, it has not been possible for Islam to transcend the political barriers of the nation state. He is now completely wrong. At that time, it made sense. But if you have watched some of the things that have gone on, when ISIL troops moved from Syria into what we call Iraq, we have scenes of them crossing the border, and then we have scenes of bulldozers destroying the border. Very symbolically important. And that is, in ISIL's mind, there is no Iraq. There is no Syria. There is an Islamic state. There is an Arab state. Those divisions were artificially created in their mind by Europe, and they have no allegiance to those. This went back to that, didn't it? Okay. I think one of the greatest difficulties of this region is the mentality of all the players, what I call the difference between taking property, taking land, taking cities, and taking back. And there's such a strong feeling of groups in this area taking back to dehumiliate from the past. So in 1948, Zionists succeed in taking back Palestine for the ancient Jewish homeland. 1948, Palestinians and Arab nations surrounding them to fight the Israelis to take it back. 1990, Saddam Hussein seeks to take back Kuwait. And you might remember that he asked the permission of the American ambassador to Iraq at that time if that was going to be okay. And the ambassador gave a very ambiguous answer that he read as green light. He then, because that division between Iraq and Kuwait is a European invention. And so when he moved in, and then first President Bush says this aggression will not stand, that surprised Saddam Hussein. 1991 was the U.S. and coalition forces, Desert Storm, taking back Kuwait. The war in Afghanistan. Taliban first fought against the Soviets to take back the country. And then the U.S.-led forces, after 9/11, moved in to take back the country from the Taliban. 2003 and following, war in Iraq leads both the Sunnis and the Shia to fight one another in sectarian battles to take back their country. Now, 2013, ISIL seeks to take back what previously was called Syria, Iraq. I think as far as we can tell from their vision, they are looking then to countries associated with a region called the Levant, which would be Jordan, which would be Lebanon, Israel's right in the way, and Egypt. Everybody feels justified, in other words. Al-Qaeda's goals. I think it's important for us to understand the relationship of ISIS or ISIL to Al-Qaeda. After 9/11, Prime Minister Tony Blair and President Bush gave a common message, and that is they attacked us, they attacked the United States because they were jealous of our freedom. If you think about that, that flatters us. If you had gone to sites in which Al-Qaeda would state their reasons, they gave three very different reasons. U.S.-led sanctions against the Iraqi people, in which 500,000 children died. The U.S. lack of concern for the Palestinians, and the fact that U.S. forces from Desert Storm remained for a time, and maybe still are there, for all I know, in Saudi Arabia. So what I'm suggesting is that 9/11 was an attempted act of dehumiliation. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, of course, we've been watching them now for over a decade. They are seeking to undermine the current government and to thwart U.S. designs in the region. This led to the civil war in Syria, which is created, which we're obviously still involved in, and we're still trying to figure out, in terms of U.S. policy, how best to proceed. Originally, as you know, I suppose if I was speaking here 15 months ago, we would have been talking about the fact that the U.S. goal was to remove Assad. We then fell into a period of great confusion because we realized that many of the rebel militias that were fighting there may not be the best alternative to Assad. You may be moving from a horrible situation to an equally horrible situation. This led to a time of kind of confusion on the part of the Obama administration. I'm not picking on him, but it was just difficult to know. We didn't want to arm the wrong militias. We wanted to arm those that were interested in democracy, in our style of that. But we weren't sure who those people were and how to get weapons to them, and we were afraid that weapons sent to some groups could end up in the hands of other groups that had more of what we call the agenda of ISIL. ISIL filled the vacuum of that in that confusion. ISIL moves on front stage and begins to create one headline after another. Iraq is, in a sense, it's the withering of what I call the American dream. I believe that I am not a cynic. I do not believe that, I reject the idea that America was only interested in oil. I reject that. I believe that there was a great desire on the part of many well-meaning people that we could change this region if we could foster a democracy that was power sharing. We would create something in that region that we believe would provide hope for nations around that, would be an attractive alternative to conflict. Much as what happened in Northern Ireland, when you bring those that have been killing each other into the political process, they become political parties. You still have debate and disagreement, but you don't have the bloodshed. And so our dream was that we were going to promote elections. You remember the thumbs with the... We were going to promote elections that would bring in a government that would be, yes, dominated by Shia, since they are in the majority, but include the Sunnis. The al-Maliki government, the Shia government, when they won the election, the United States said, okay, it's now time to share power. And the al-Maliki government says, no, it's not. We've been oppressed for a long time, and now it's our turn to run this country. And Sunnis began to feel ignored. In some cases, their education system broke down. In some cases, paychecks were not arriving to Sunni areas. Sunni troops were feeling a great deal of unpatriotic feeling toward the government in Baghdad. We could not convince the Shia government that won in Iraq to share power. And that has been this great withering dream. This has led then to frustrations on the part of the Sunnis in Iraq, because they are 35–40%. The Ba'athist was Hussein's party, again Sunni, and Iraqi Sunni soldiers. If you might have had that same feeling I did, and that is 500 ISIL troops would come into an area, and they were supposedly met by the Iraqi army in the thousands, and then the next we knew, the Iraqi army had given up their weapons and surrendered. And we thought, well, how's that possible? And what we now know from reputable sources is that when the United States military was in Iraq, the Iraqi army really made progress and was accountable to the United States. So we could watch and sort of control how they functioned. When we left, we now know that corruption just ate away at the Iraqi army. There's a story that was in the New Yorker magazine that there was an area where there was 10,000 Iraqi troops, Sunni, and they were getting 10,000 paychecks a month. Unfortunately, there was only 500 that were actually showing up for duty. So they were receiving the paychecks, taking the money. But that helps us understand that when ISIL crossed the border, they did not meet 10,000 troops committed to defending this country. They may have met a much smaller number, and they probably met a large group of troop soldiers who were sympathetic as fellow Sunnis to take back the country. Al-Qaeda and ISIL it's getting very interesting to try to figure out the relationship of them. Al-Qaeda had a more traditional goal. Separate branches of Al-Qaeda would be in Syria and Iraq, and that they would cooperate. It seems to me a more religious movement in some ways, more donor-based. One of the things I discovered this week in hearing at the conference that was in Washington, D.C. on terrorism is that if a group wanted to join Al-Qaeda or affiliate with Al-Qaeda, they had to be on kind of a probationary period for quite a long time to make sure that they were fundamentally on the same page. And what ISIL learned from that is that, for example, the tragedy that happened in Libya this past week with the beheading of the Coptic Christian men, that's a group that is not formally connected with ISIL, except ISIL says, sure, you can wave our flag, you can claim to be with us. They don't have any probationary period. And so Al-Qaeda was, in a sense, more strict, more rigid on who could use our title, and ISIL is not. The other thing I think that's very important is with ISIL, we have a group that's very sophisticated in terms of public relations, in terms of exploiting the media, social media. I was watching a piece of a video that ISIL shot in the battle against Erbil earlier this week. And, you know, if I just looked at it in a certain way with the music in the background and the people shouting in the background, it was like I was watching a video game. And I thought, well, that's got to be attractive to, we know the main recruits are young men into ISIL. We've got 90 countries that have sent young men, or young men have left 90 countries to join ISIL to fight with them. Some have estimated 200 new recruits a day, 1,000 a week. And so when these recruits come, they often ask them, what is your network back home? And so they use social media to connect with their network of friends back home. They brag about all the great things that are happening here, and this is paradise. This is a true Islamic state, and so they're very effective in a way that Al-Qaeda wasn't. I mean, one of the differences, I think Al-Qaeda would often say, "Are you willing to be a suicide bomber?" And I think ISIL is willing to say, "Are you willing to kill people?" And that's easier to agree to. I think there's three narratives going on in the region, and they can't work together. The Shia narrative, if you're over there in Iran, and now the government next to you in Iraq is Shia, you're saying history is finally turning out the way God wanted. If you're an ISIL, you're looking at a revived caliphate to correct the humiliation and the damage done first by European colonialism, then by America's venture into Iraq, and the more recent spread of Shia distortion, in their opinion, of Islam. Our narrative, democracies based on power sharing of diverse groups, are the best hope for peace in the region. I actually believe that. That is the best hope. It's just not maybe realistic. If they succeed, if these countries in that region would succeed as democracies, and Afghanistan and Iraq could be just the beginning then of a transformation of the region. That was our narrative. That was our hope. If I go back, however, to this map, now we have red here Shia, we have red here now Shia in Iraq with the new government. Assad in Syria is affiliated with the Shia, and Lebanon is now with the Hezbollah, affiliated with the Shia. So from the Saudis' point of view and from other Sunnis' point of view, you have an arc of Shia faith that wasn't there before. And who brought it about? It looks very much like the United States helped bring that about. American options. If Iraq has a functioning power-sharing government, if our dream comes true, U.S. has a beachhead of Western-style democracy, our values and ideals in the center of a troubled region. That was our hope. Question, is Iraq committed to this possible future? They haven't indicated even now with the al-Maliki government gone that they're committed to power sharing. Is corruption in the military and the government too rampant? And what about Iran next door? They love the fact that there's a Shia government in place in Iraq. Will they stand by when the Sunnis are invited back into the government? Option two, again, if we could achieve our dream and the Syrian civil war would end with Assad's ouster, we got the question, who will rule Syria? Will it be ISIL or democratically inclined rebels? One of the things I think we can all agree on is that Israel and the United States cannot allow ISIL to be on Israel's border. So their activity in Jordan and in their desire to reverse things in Lebanon is a big concern. Lebanon is now being drawn into the civil war, and we have a strange situation. Iran, Russia, for various reasons, Hezbollah, Israel, and the United States would all be interested in ISIL being defeated. The problem is we can't talk with each other very, with Crimea going on and in the Ukraine, the United States and Russia are not speaking terms. Iran and the United States, as we indicated earlier, that there's very low trust there. So the question is, will democratically inclined rebels in Syria ever be major players in the war? This is a question this week that was in the news. Are they capable of defeating, on the one hand, Assad and then turning and defeating ISIL, or is this rebel group more a figment of our imagination as the United States? Let's talk about the Kurds. The Kurds are in the north of Iraq, the north of Iran, the north of Syria, and the southern part of Turkey. If you're following the news this week, you know that the Kurds are very good warriors, and they actually repelled the advance against Erbil yesterday. They're very, we count on them to be a force that can be successful. The problem is that the Kurds do not look forward to a future of Iraq being this power-sharing government. They want a nation of their own, the Kurdish people, and their payment in their mind is that we are fighting with ultimately that if we can push ISIL back in Iraq, you owe us nationhood. So I celebrate, as many do, when the Kurds do well. I just know that their dream of the future is not the U.S. dream, and it's certainly not the dream of those 4 countries where the Kurds now occupy. Another option, can we bankrupt ISIL? We did, to a certain extent, bankrupted al-Qaeda. We could identify, excuse me, their major donors, and we could freeze their assets. Perhaps we just need patience on our part. Perhaps ISIL will overreach itself and will begin to lose battles. Well, the problem is that, as we said, ISIL is pretty sophisticated. They have a business plan. They're not as donor-driven. One of the kind of contrasts I like to make is if al-Qaeda would have taken an oil field in northern Iraq 10 years ago, they probably would have destroyed it knowing that they could not hold it for the long term. When ISIL took the same oil field, they kept production going. And they are selling the oil on the black market, largely to Turkey, for approximately, at one point, there's some disagreement now, it was, at one point it was $3 million a day income. They're also, they make money through kidnappings and ransoms. There's a lot of information, misinformation. We're not sure. A news story came out this week that they're selling human organs too, probably from those that they are killing, if they are doing that. That was just reported. What can we do? We can do something in the United States. Part of it's happening right here today. And that is the last thing we want to do as a society is to humiliate the Muslims in our midst. To brand them as terrorists in some way or sympathizers with this is to give ISIL a victory on our own soil. I have been involved in various activities over the past couple of years and on a book I've been working on in which there's been a lot of interfaith bridge building. There's a group called the Shapiro Group, and I know David Shahid is here somewhere. It's a group of Catholic men and Muslim men that meet once a week at Shapiro's Jewish Deli. How's that for ecumenism? Approximately once a week. And their goal is to encourage one another to do the will of God on a daily basis. That's as strong for a Muslim as it is for a Christian, to do the will of God on a daily basis. They've been meeting for 18 years, so long before 9/11. That's, in my opinion, ISIL's nightmare. That's the last thing they want to see happening in the West. They are thrilled with the polarization in Europe against Muslims and in the United States, more of it coming out this week. Shoulder to Shoulder, an Interfaith Witness that was mentioned earlier is a group that I helped found, and we had an experience in Columbus in our third year. End of August this year, maybe some of you read it in the news, there was some graffiti sprayed on 3 churches in Columbus, Indiana, supposedly from Muslims. The word Quran was painted on the walls of the churches. We organized an event 4 days later, which we had permission from the mayor to meet on the steps of City Hall. And we had speakers from the Muslim community, the civil rights community, pastors of the 3 churches. 2 of the pastors were there speaking. We were hoping 50 people showed up. 250 people showed up for that event on a hot September 1, I think it was. Very hot day. But it was the community of Columbus saying, we will not let hatred divide us. We will not let hatred define this community. As you know, Columbus, because of Cummins Engine, has a lot of diversity of ethnicity and religions. And so it was a really interesting event, very important event for them gathering together in a sense saying, Columbus is this, standing together. I visited Omaha, Nebraska. You're not going to believe this, nobody does. Omaha, Nebraska is 20 years ahead of the rest of the country in terms of interfaith. The Jewish community was given land for a new synagogue, 40 acres, I think it was, too much for them. The rabbi turned to his community and said, who do we want as our neighbors? We had good neighbors with the Methodists downtown when we were down there. Who do we want now when we're out more in the suburbs? And he answered the question himself, we want the Muslims as our neighbors. And so the Jewish community gave part of the property to the Muslim community to build a mosque, gave some more of the property to Christian communities in Omaha to build a Christian center. And then in the middle is this tent of Abraham, this meeting place where interfaith can happen, interfaith gatherings. People will worship separately in the mosque, the synagogue, and the church, but they will gather for interfaith events. At the other side of the tent of Abraham, there's a bridge. It crosses a creek. This is honest to God. The name of the creek was Hell Creek. And they're thrilled to say we're building a bridge of understanding across hell. They are very inspiring. Go to their website, the Tri-Faith Initiative, Omaha, Nebraska. They're doing some wonderful things. I think we need to encourage where we can without butting in. We need to encourage American Shia and American Sunni Muslims to create a different relationship and paradigm in the West so that can be raised up for the other parts of the world where this ancient hostility has gone on. I do believe that there is something that can happen in the American Muslim community. I don't place all the responsibility on them. As I said earlier, I think they speak out quite a bit. They're just, when they speak out, they're not covered. And I think that then creates a feeling that they're not speaking out. And I suppose I've had that question asked more than anything else. Why don't they speak out? Why don't the Muslims speak out? And I said they do. Unfortunately, it's on C-SPAN, and it's not on NBC. My last slide. No, next to last. Where can you donate? United States Refugee Relief is where you can donate for these millions that are in Syrian camps, refugee camps from the Syrian Civil War. I then posed a question to myself. I thought, I was a Christian. We say the Lord's Prayer all the time, and I got to that phrase, give us this day our daily bread, and I began to get troubled by the word us, because I thought, us for Jesus is not necessarily just me and my kids and my wife. Give us our daily bread. And I thought, what would it cost for me to feed another human being outside my family, somewhere in the world that really needed it, for a whole year? And I estimated maybe $300. And I sent messages to a lot of food relief organizations and got back all kinds of messages like, we don't factor it that way, but here's what you might think about. And then I finally got a message back from Food for the Poor, a very reputable group. For $43.77, you can feed another human being 2 nutritious meals a day for a year. Try spending less than that going out to eat with your family. My last thought. One of the things that happened in my interviews with monks and nuns around the country for the first book was that I began to pick up a strange vibe from some of the monks. And different places, one old monk at Gethsemane Abbey, where Thomas Merton was a monk, said, I want to talk to you. There's this woman in Ireland, and Jesus is speaking to her. And I thought, oh, no. I thought, oh, boy. So I was, okay, tell me what. So, of course, I had to ask the question, what's Jesus saying? And well, Jesus is telling her that everybody needs to get ready. There's a real positive spiritual wave coming in the world. I didn't put it in the book, didn't fit, didn't think. And then I was revisiting a monastery up on the shore of Lake Superior, 5 Ukrainian Catholic monks, 4 of them are grown-up Methodists. Sorry. They're now Ukrainian Catholic monks. And so we're sitting in the library, and the one monk leans forward and says, can I tell you what happened in Rome? And I thought, there's nobody within 20 miles of us. Why are we whispering? But so he said, the heads of all the monastic orders were in Rome, and Pope Benedict invited him in the Sistine Chapel and basically said, we believe that there's going to be so many people that are going to want to come back into religious faith the next 20 years that we need to get ready to open the doors a lot wider. And I just put that to the side. It didn't seem related to this issue of ISIL. And then a couple of weeks ago, the penny dropped, and I thought, when I look at the faces of young men, principally attracted to ISIL, they are energized, they are full of life, they are passionate. We may not agree on what's the source of that, but it's real. Now, to go to a typical high school in America or a major, I won't say this about Franklin College, but a major university, go to a large lecture hall, look at the last 6 rows of the people that are sleeping there or hungover, and you will not see that look of passion. And I do believe, when I think about this spiritual wave, because there's Buddhist belief system, the same way that there's something coming. The increased interest in meditation is an aspect of that. There might be something here that ISIL is promoting, and that is, I am convinced personally as a Christian that American consumerism and American materialism is not going to defeat ISIL. That's just saying your quest for meaning can be found in buying stuff. And I believe that the young people that are drawn to ISIL are a tremendous challenge to us to say, because President Obama just today speaking said we have to create We have to talk to these young men. We have to find them jobs or whatever, but we have to change their thinking on things, and we have to affect what the appeal is of that group. And I'm thinking, what is the appeal of the West? What do we have to offer? If you're joining ISIL for good or bad, you're promised that you can help change the world map this week, and they're doing that. Most people in the West, I think, believe that history's over. We won. We're on top. It's just more of this. And I do believe that there's a challenge coming. I believe that we're going to have to meet a spiritual vision with a spiritual vision. And I am committed to the idea that interfaith cooperation is that kind of vision that I have seen energize people in a healthy way. And I do believe that that is the way to build a bridge over Hell Creek. Thank you very much.
Sorry guys, just getting everything ready. All right, thank you everybody for coming today. Do I need this or can you guys hear me? So now you can hear me? Okay, so thank you everybody for coming in today in this horrible weather. Anybody see the movie Frozen? Doesn't it feel like that? Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into it because I have 20 minutes. So I'm going to be talking about ISIS, Muslims, and Islam. And so I'm just going to jump right in. Muslims condemn terrorism. We've been condemning it since September 11th. We've condemned it so many times that we're a little tired of doing that, but we're going to continue doing that if that's what people need to know, that we're peaceful, loving human beings. So Muslims condemn it. And what I'm going to do here today, sorry, I keep moving. I have a habit of moving. What I'm going to do here in this lecture is show you the actions of ISIS. And I'm going to compare it to what Islam really says about how to be a Muslim and what Islamic law says. And then we're going to delve into what Islamic law is because that seems to be like a hot topic along with ISIS today. So what is a caliphate? What is this idea that these people want to develop this like imaginary world that is supposedly perfect? A caliphate is a system of governance run by a leader, chosen and elected by his people to govern a country by certain Islamic principles. Now, the idea of the caliphate in history, it was just a person who was in charge because you needed a stable, somewhat stable system. We don't need a caliphate here because we have our own government and our own system. So that was the concept of what the caliphate was in Islamic history. And that's why scholars said, yeah, we should have a caliphate because we need order. The caliph, or in Arabic it's called khalifa, the caliph here, the idea that ISIS has is that this person has unlimited amount of power. And this person is given responsibilities that they can only actually have if they are elected. And that's where a problem comes with ISIS. How is this leader elected? What did Abu Bakr say? Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, not the actual caliph from Islamic history, because the first Islamic caliph, because the first Islamic caliph that we have was actually Abu Bakr. Now this is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He actually changed his name, and he's the caliph here for ISIS. And what he said was, I have been appointed over you. There is no process in which they can actually elect him today. If you want to have a caliphate, if you want a caliph, all Muslims, 1.6 billion of them, actually have to go and vote and give their allegiance. That's how the system works. And that was a system that was called shura in Islamic history. All scholars have agreed about this. Like, you cannot have a caliphate today unless everybody gives their allegiance to this person. The fact that there was no consultation amongst Muslims throughout the world makes his position of authority void. So what are some of the qualifications of a leader? This person in Islamic history, according to scholars, had to be the most upright, perfect, close to perfect individual. And again, everybody had to elect him. He had to be a really decent human being. And all these qualities initially were about just his personality. He had to be an intelligent person. He had to be caring. He had to be loving. He had to care for his people. And then as you go along with Islamic history, what you see happen is people started adding more things to that. Like, scholars did add more things to that. And that's because during political problems, you needed more control. So they started giving political authority to scholars. One of the things Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi also said was, I'm not the best amongst you. And what the general public, even Muslims, don't know is, they don't know that speech that Abu Bakr gave. And they don't know the rules about Islamic law and how the actual person elected has to be one of the best amongst the whole community. So when he was like, I'm not the best amongst you, but I'm still appointed, most people don't know you can't do that. So Abu Bakr, I mean, I don't need to say it again, but he does not meet these requirements, nor were these requirements consulted. Now, he did do a little bit of his research. I mean, he started his speech a little bit of the same way as Abu Bakr back in history, but if you really are a student or studying Islamic law and Islamic history, you can see where the flaws lie. Now, who wants a caliphate? This is where things get a little bit confusing. Now, there's ISIS, right? So there's so many different kinds of Muslims, just like there are so many different kinds of Jews and Christians and all different kinds of people in the world. So I divided it up into several categories. And this is just how academics do it. We break things down. So in our first category, we have ISIS and extremists. And these people, as we know from the media and from the rest of the world, what we can see is they actually really do want a caliphate, and the way that they want to go about it is very violent. Then the second category is Islamists. Now, the one thing my students in my courses always get confused about is the difference between an Islamist and what an extremist is. Islamists do want a caliphate, but they are also a minority in the Islamic community or in the Muslim community, and so are extremists. The next category is just mainstream Muslims, someone like me, someone like Wasima, and amongst them, we have different categories as well. There's reformers, there's modernists, there's academics. I'm an academic, so I look at things more critically. I go back to actual classical texts, and I believe in reinterpretation, meaning there are certain things in text that are still 12th century, 16th century. We need to reinterpret some of those laws. So that's one category. The other category of Muslims are liberals. I mean, there's so many different kinds of liberals. Some of them won't pray or practice. Modernist academics tend to practice and pray and do all the obligatory things that Islam prescribes. And then the last category are conservative and traditionals. And they're just people who don't understand like politics, and they don't want to delve into that. And they're just going along with what the tradition has said throughout history. So sometimes they do take on more conservative roles, like the man is the breadwinner, like things like that. Now, when I was talking about Islamists and ISIS, they do both want a caliphate, but the difference between them is that ISIS is actually going about it in a very violent way. Islamists, on the other hand, don't exactly believe that you're supposed to go off killing people and establish the caliphate that way. Now, what is this idea of the caliphate? What does that mean? Now, according to who you ask, or according to different amounts of scholars, there's the caliphate of back in the day, 1,400 years ago, okay? And that was during Muhammad's time, and then the time after that, and then this whole beautiful supposed caliphate in which everything was perfect. If you read Islamic history, yes, things were great. Like during Muhammad's time, things were pretty good. The 30 years after the 4 major caliphs, things were pretty good if you really analyze Islamic history. after that, things kind of get ugly and a little hairy, but that's with any system of government. Like, you have things go wrong. So what is the caliphate? There's some people who actually want to go back to the 1400 years ago. And I mean, if you go to some parts of the world, like Saudi Arabia, like there's certain tendencies of like literally interpreting things and going back 1400 years ago. And then there are others who just say, hey, we need to have a caliphate, meaning all these Muslim countries need to reunite. And the one thing that they advocate for is Islamic law in these Muslim countries. So what are we going to talk about next? We're going to talk about Islamic law. What is it? And how do we even come about it? Is it Sharia? It's actually not Sharia. I know Fox News and all these other networks talk about how Sharia and Islamic law are the same. They are very different. It actually hurts my feelings when people say that, mostly because I teach Islamic law too. And I mean, if somebody wrote that on an exam, I would take 50 points off out of 100. So, I mean, I don't, but yeah, you get the point. So what is Islamic law? Okay, we have the Quran, right? That's our main text, right? And then that's what, like, we believe that God sent down to Muhammad through Angel Gabriel. And then we have hadith. This is an example of a hadith. Kindness is a mark of faith, and whoever is not kind has no faith. A hadith is a saying by the Prophet Muhammad. So what scholars do, and you can only be a scholar to do or engage in Islamic law, is they look at the Quran, okay, and certain verses. And then they're like, okay, so some verses in the Quran are vague. Like, they're not direct, so you have to figure out what it means. Then you look at the hadith for the explanation, and then you really use a lot of interpretation and try to figure out how do these things apply in our society today, and that is how you get Islamic law. That is why Islamic law is different in all these different Muslim countries. So the practice of Islamic law, or the practices of Muslims in Indonesia, which is a democracy, is very different from Saudi Arabia, and that's what explains those differences. And that's why Muslims in the US are different from some Muslims in other places. So I'm just going to read this because we really need to understand ijtihad and what that concept actually is. In Islam, the term fiqh is translated as Islamic law. Islamic law is derived from the principles prescribed in the Quran and Hadith. It is extrapolated by scholars in different epochs to cater to the changing needs of society. Just as society and its problems change, these laws too must evolve to offer adequate solutions to the complex problems arising with the changing of times. This process, in which scholars cogitate, thoroughly research, analyze the text, derive, and then offer new interpretations, is called ijtihad. Does that make a little bit of sense? Do you guys understand what ijtihad is? So another word for it would be interpretation. So, for example, today we have medical marijuana. They didn't have medical marijuana back in the day. So they'll look at hadith, they'll look at Quran, and then the scholars will be like, hey, is it okay for Muslims to actually use medical marijuana? And that is how ijtihad works. Now, Sharia is a scary word that everybody's scared of because of the media. What is Sharia? Sharia are actual principles in the Quran and in hadith. So they're concepts, they're actually not laws. And these are the principles that scholars are looking at when they actually come up with Islamic law. So you cannot conflate the two. And because they're principles, they're really gentle things, like be good to your wife, be nice to your mom, even if she's being mean to you. I'm looking at my mom today. So what is the difference between Sharia and Islamic law? Sharia are principles. We really need to nail that down. In Islamic law are laws that scholars really derive from these principles. And we talked about how it's different in different countries because of cultures and stuff. Now, majority of Muslims practice Sharia and Islamic law in their private lives. The majority of Sharia deals with diurnal activities, like we pray 5 times a day. I pray 5 times a day. It helps me think about God. It helps me be a decent human being. I need that reminder. So, for example, I remember, like, in 6th grade, I cheated on an exam, okay? I was, like, looking over someone else's paper, and then, like, the next prayer came, and then I went and prayed, and I was like, man, that's so bad. Like, I just cheated, and now I'm praying. So the idea is it's like a constant reminder of God and trying to be a good human being. Islamists and extremists advocate for Sharia in politics, thus combining one's private and public affairs. And that's what makes it a little contentious, because someone, at least modernists and academics, don't think you should be told to pray. You should do it on your own if you want to. Like, again, there's no compulsion in religion. That's like a major principle in Islam. So there's different perspectives of Islamic law. Islamists think that Islamic law is the answer to everything. Everything can be answered through there, and they allow ijtihad, they allow interpretation, but only by certain people they agree with. And they definitely desire the caliphate, and so they think the country should be run by Islamic law. Now, modernists, I'm considered a modernist, so we look at what is the purpose behind the law. Like, why was this law even established? So we look at, okay, the Quran says we can't drink alcohol. Why can't we drink alcohol? Oh, because you start acting a little crazy. So hence you can't have ecstasy and all those other drugs too. So we look at the objectives behind the rules and the laws. We also contextualize Islamic history, so we won't just take a verse from the Quran and say, oh yeah, now we can kill the infidel. Like, you don't do that. You have to contextualize. Punishments listed are the maximum allowed. So what does that mean? You hear about Saudi Arabia and how people cut off hands for stealing. Now, those are the maximum punishments allowed if you're even going to apply that. And the idea is, don't apply that, just have that there to scare people. But the idea was not to actually go and cut off someone's hands. It's just supposed to scare you, not to do it. And again, these are like modernist ideas. They look at what the larger objective is behind the law. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this, and we're having this discussion about Islamic law, is to show how Islamic law is open to interpretation, and there are numerous interpretations in Islam. Like, it's a fact of Islamic law, it's a fact of Islamic history. Like, throughout different time periods, you needed different interpretations. Not one interpretation applies for all different time periods. So that's why we're talking about Islamic law, because we have ISIS, who for modern day Muslims, for American Muslims, are a bunch of crazies out there doing their own thing. And then there's the rest of the Muslim population who interprets very normally and practices very normally. So the other thing I need to emphasize is ISIS has no authority in Islamic law for making statements of what Islam prescribes. Why don't they have authority? Because only scholars can interpret. You have to have, like, we have the PhD system here today, right? And it takes so long. I mean, I've got so many gray hairs. It takes forever to do a PhD. Now, to be a scholar in the Muslim world, it takes so much longer than that. And only scholars can actually interpret texts and actually make Islamic laws. They also have to be aware of what's happening culturally and in their society and economically, because all those factors come into play when you're actually drafting laws. And there's a huge list of qualifications you have to have in order to even engage in Islamic law. And again, we're emphasizing this because ISIS has no qualifications to be making laws or to be ruling. There are some positive aspects of Islamic law, like it's changeable, it's malleable, you do kind of what is comfortable for you. The negative aspects of that is, in Islamic history, there were a few people who, like Ibn Taymiyyah, who had a tendency to interpret a little more extreme, and that was because during those times they were being politically attacked. So they're like, hey, you know what? We have every right to fight back, and we're going to be ruthless about it. So in every time period, there's like a few crazy people. Even in every family, there's like one crazy person. So that's just, of course, during 100 periods, you're going to have someone. So what do Muslims today think? The majority of Muslims understand that the notions of going back to the old times is impossible. You would have to have all these Muslim countries, all these cultures coming back together somehow and forming a caliphate, which is nearly impossible to do today just because we have such different systems of living. So most people don't agree with this whole idea. The Muslim world is divided by country lines. There's cultural differences. There's the evolution of Islamic law that caters to the needs of society. Every country has its own ideas. And so the idea of ISIS establishing a caliphate is something that only ISIS and some Islamists believe in. And even Islamists don't agree with ISIS. Even Al-Qaeda doesn't agree with ISIS. I want to discuss slavery for like 2.5 seconds because that is something that they are engaging in. And so a lot of people have asked, what is Islam's perspective, or what's the Muslim perspective on slavery? Slavery has been abolished in Islam. Like, there was a consensus amongst all Muslim scholars in Islamic history that you cannot have slavery. And when all scholars during a certain time period agree on something, that actually becomes a solid law, and it goes into Islamic law books, and you have to follow that. What ISIS did was they broke that very foundational law, and it is actually against Islamic beliefs. You can look at the following verses in the Quran. What about the treatment of Christians, Jews, and other minorities? Now, if you look at actual Islamic history, sure, there were small time periods which some bad things happened, right? But if you look at minorities in every country, they go through things. But the one thing that Islamic law makes sure is that minorities are given their rights. They have the right to worship. They have the right to live comfortably. Like, yes, there was this concept of jizya, which was a tax, but Muslims paid the zakat, and that was the equivalent of it. So every person in society pays a tax, just like in our country, everybody pays a tax. And those who were exempt were like someone who was poor or disabled or didn't have an income, children, elderly people, women who weren't working. So there's a huge category of leniency there. Also, as I mentioned before, there's no compulsion in religion. It's forbidden for anyone to be harmed under Muslim rule or anything even remotely in Islamic law. You also can just look at the constitution of Medina, and that's when Muhammad and his followers went to Medina, and they drafted this constitution with other groups of people. The other groups were polytheist Arabs, Jews, and then the Meccans and the Medina people. So everybody came together, and how did that work? All parties had to be present before they actually drafted this constitution. And in it, they actually said Christians can follow their own thing, Jews can follow their own thing, and they're not judged in accordance to the Islamic principles. They're allowed to do their own thing. Has anybody heard about this, the letter to Baghdadi? So some people. So over 100 prominent Muslim scholars in the world, after ISIS came about, drafted this letter to Baghdadi. It's like around 20 pages or something, and it goes over every single thing that ISIS has done and how it is against the teachings of Islam, and all these prominent scholars have denounced them and condemned ISIS and terrorism. So it's something that you should definitely Google and look at, because it's definitely available. Now, what are some solutions? The question of where's the moderate Muslim voice, just as Professor Carlson said, is it incorrectly places the blame on moderate Muslims, as no one has ever asked where's the moderate Jewish voice or the moderate Christian voice when people of those faiths commit crimes. Muslims are viewed as being guilty until they have to prove that they are actually normal. This also creates an unsafe environment in which they are constantly scrutinized and are victims of hate crimes. Anybody know the FBI statistic for hate crimes of last year against Muslims? It was a lot, right? So before 9/11 versus last year, the percentage went up 1,700%. So that's just a little piece of information to keep in mind. I have a picture of these three here, and I'm going to talk about them. The people who suffer are Muslims who have nothing to do with ISIS. ISIS is killing Muslims. 90% of the people they killed are Muslims. They suffer by the hands of ISIS, and they suffer through hate crimes. So instead of us thinking about Muslims as ISIS, we should think about Muslims as these three people who were killed last week and murdered, execution style, and they were normal Americans. They were students. One was in dental school. They were excellent citizens. They were activists. And you can't help but question, like me and my husband were talking the other day, like, when is this going to end and when are we going to be accepted? Like, it's like we always have to condemn it when we didn't do anything wrong, and everybody looks at us as if we're terrorists, as if we did something wrong. So that question is definitely something we should discuss more. And the one thing I want to emphasize is that we are all American. We have American ideas. We are scared of terrorism too. We enjoy American values. We love apple pie. We love cheesecake. My favorite song right now is Let It Go from Frozen, and I have it on replay. So we are all American. We have the same ideas as everybody else. And I think, just as Professor Carlson said, we need to all work together. Not just do we need to educate Muslims who are going towards ISIS, I think educating everyone and having more interfaith work is a great idea, and altogether I think bigotry is something that should never be tolerated. Thank you all so much.
Testing. Lee, can I have you turn on the wireless mic, please? Testing. Testing. So we're going to go ahead and get the Q&A session started. Until we get this mic to work, if you have a question, you will have to project your voice. I would say maybe even we could start making a line. No, we're just going to raise our hand, and I will go ahead and call on you. Josh, can I have you? All right, questions. I saw a hand over here. So this sir right here in the khaki shirt, polo.
Thank you. What's of value between all this richness and variety, and not have the conflict that results from it.
Did you get three questions? And I will just request that when you pose a question, please let us know which speaker the question is for, Dr. Carlson, Ms. Ayesha Butt, or for both of them. So your question was for her?
Dr. Carlson.
One of the characteristics of an educated person that is unfortunately being forgotten is in encountering something new or unusual to postpone judgment until understanding is reached. And when I explain this to students, I say, well, what is the level of understanding required here? Because obviously, I've been a Christian my whole life, and I don't completely understand it. Still working on it. So that can't be the test. But what I think is the characteristic of a certainly liberal arts educated person, which is the context in which I teach and was trained in myself, and that is I have to understand how something new and unusual to me, let's take a religious tradition, provides a path to meaning for the follower of that tradition before I make any observations or comments in judgment of it. And I think from that premise you can see that one of the things that happens as our world gets increasingly diverse, I think from what I've heard, there's more people on the move in our world now than ever before. There's more people shifting cultures, immigration. I mean, borders are not like they used to be. So we're going to be faced with exactly the issue you're talking about. When a person makes a judgment prior to understanding, That's the word prejudice, prejudgment. And that is, unfortunately, more likely to happen in times of great stress and tragedy. So most of us know that story, that in the days following 9/11, not only were Muslims attacked in this country, but two Sikh men in Arizona were killed because they were wearing turbans, and the killers thought they were Muslims. You know, it's difficult. We have an emotional reaction to tragedies in particular. And I think ISIL is exploiting this. The value of the beheadings from their point of view is recruitment. It's also headlines. They know that they will make the front page with these activities. So if you look at ISIL's vision, it is of a world, certainly a region of the world in which diversity does not exist. If we're going to counter that kind of extremism, we must demonstrate exactly what you're saying, the value of diversity. And we're not good at that. I was reminded of something Thomas Merton said about third world, sometimes considered primal religions. He said, yeah, they're technologically way behind the West. They're spiritually advanced. Because in our technological advancement, we have become spiritually impoverished. And so in this encounter with diversity that we're going to increasingly have, I think one of the things I often try to include, I'll include now, is that religions in the future will either build walls of separation or they'll build bridges of understanding. And I think we know right now that there are some traditions within all the religions that are in this country that are intent on building walls of separation. And that's just going to pose all kinds of problems. But the other possibility of bridges of understanding and bridges of encouragement to one another. I love the Shapiro men. I love to be with them. I love the idea that they're encouraging one another to do the will of God on a daily basis, and that's a common value. So I'll stop there.
All right, we have a question right over here. Right up here.
My questions are for Dr. Carlson. You said that our involvement in the Middle East is not primarily about oil. My question is it a little bit? The second question is, Maliki is no longer prime minister, and you referenced his
Successor.
Yeah, he's the vice president now. Is that significant?
I don't know that. I learn a lot whenever I listen to people ask questions. I didn't know that al-Maliki was still showing his face because he was removed in such a ignominious way or something. It was just really embarrassing. The oil issue is, it's a question. Is it more important that we answer that in terms of reality, or is it more important that we answer that in terms of perception? Because perception becomes, for many people, reality. I'll just tell you a story that this was 2003, I think it was, before the invasion of Iraq, and we had on Franklin College campus, we had visiting 10 students from Russia. And so they were on campus for a few days, and at one of the events where they were just sharing their point of view, President Martin, a past president of Franklin College, asked them, what are you told in your country about whether America's going to invade Iraq or not? Because, they were still looking at weapons of mass destruction and all that issue. And all the Russians said, we are told back home that the United States has to invade Iraq because of oil reserves. Now, I was shocked by that, but only because that's a perception of apparently a country. When we look at Russia now invading the area called Crimea and the oil reserves there, obviously you could say, is that the reality of the reason? Is that the perception? At some point, I think these things get you can't tell them apart. I can't look into the heart of Donald Rumsfeld and say, I do believe his heart is complicated. And so I think demonizing those leaders, I mean, this may be off the track, but how can we promote a power-sharing government elsewhere in the world when we don't even seem to want a power-sharing government here?
There is one question right here in the red polo.
Question for both scholars. The news and the media is giving a distinction on the difference between ISIL and ISIS. I have my own, but I probably am wrong. And I wanted both of you to explain to me what you think the differences are. I'm sure there is a concrete definition, so for either person.
I don't think it's a conspiracy by the Obama administration, which is sometimes what I hear. Just remember that ISIS, ISIL are English acronyms for a group. I mean, in Arabic, it supposedly, I'm not sure about this now. I was told that it came out Daesh, D-A-E-S-H. I've more recently been told that even that is a pejorative term that's meant to put them in a bad light. The way the media first got on with ISIS was the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq and Syria. That's what they thought it was. I don't think that actually was true either. But then there was the other thing, ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which is the whole region. The Obama administration prefers that. The United States government prefers that. I think there's kind of a, hate to say in this contest, a pissing contest right now. I think the Republicans are saying ISIS and the Democrats are saying ISIL, which creates this question, well, is there something going on? And I'm also humored by the so-called Islamic State, which is our way of saying we don't recognize them. Again, the reality and the perception, I think the Islamic State is a reality that we're going to have to deal with. I think we can call them so-called from now until the fourth president down the road, and I don't think it has any. I don't think it's helpful. Their legitimacy within the Islamic community, I think, is a true issue to talk about, and I learned a lot just in the presentation, just on the distinctions. But I don't really, I see this as almost interchangeable, and that's the way I approached it in my second book. Sometimes I talked about ISIS/ISIL. More and more I'm just calling it the Islamic State.
So I actually call them un-Islamic State because I don't believe in them. But I chose ISIS because, again, it's Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and I'd rather just keep it that small and not give them credit and say it's ISIL as in all of Levant.
The un-Islamic State, I like that.
It is.
There was a question over here. Joshua?
I have a question for the missus. This Islamic State versus Sharia law, and like if you think, if you look at Iran, is that Islamic law? And Saudi Arabia, would that be more the other?
Okay, so Islamic law are things like majority of it. We're talking about 90% of Islamic law is diurnal things, like me waking up in the morning, brushing my teeth. It actually says like make sure you don't smell bad. Like principles do say things like that, and it'll be something like Be respectful to your parents. Don't argue back with them. If they're wrong, tell them something nicely or inform them nicely. It talks about fasting. It talks about prayer. It talks about the pilgrimage. So 90% are very normal things that everybody does. Now, 10%, which is punitive measures, that is open to the interpreter in that country and how they want, whether they want execution, whether they want the death penalty, whether they don't believe in that, how they want to punish the person is up to them. Now, Iran is a theocracy, and that's the only place in the world, I think, or in the Muslim world at least, where they do their own thing. And Iran is kind of, it's different from other areas because they have their own Sharia law. So they have their own Islamic law in a way because they're Shia. And because the rest of the majority of the Muslim world is Sunni, we have different ideas and different ways we go about it. Now, the history of Saudi Arabia, I would recommend reading The Great Theft. And that's by Khalid Abu al-Fadl. He's a UCLA law professor. He will explain in one chapter the history of Saudi Arabia and how it goes back to the idea of Wahhabism. And Wahhabism, for me, is problematic. For a lot of academics, it's problematic because there are certain ideas within Wahhabism that are Puritan, and it's my way or the highway. So Saudi Arabia has certain tendencies. That's one reason why I will never visit it unless, like, I have to go for the pilgrimage. So all these countries, just keep in mind, have their own things. They have their own cultures, they have their own ideas, they have their own economic systems. Everything is very different. So in accordance to where you are and what your ideas are, what your cultural beliefs are, and how strong your government is, how much money you have, you're going to have different ideas.
We have one question here in the middle.
My question is for Mrs. Ayesha. First of all, thank you for the distinction between Sharia and Islamic law. I've never encountered that before, so that was helpful to me. I wanted to know, is there an official process that Muslims are pretty much agreed upon for determining who is an Islamic law scholar? And my reason, I guess, for asking is we're told only scholars can interpret Islamic law. And are there perhaps differences between Sunni and Shia and the understanding of Islamic law, specifically for, I mean, I guess where is ISIL or ISIS coming from when they believe they have a caliph? Do they think it's some sort of a divine appointment, and do they have some sort of precedent in Islamic law for thinking in those terms?
That's a lot of questions.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so can you do the number one first?
Yeah, is there like an official thing where everybody's like, this is an official Islamic scholar, we're all agreed, this person can validly interpret?
So we have a slight issue with that in the Muslim world today because we have scholars of the West, we have like Hamza Yusuf here in the United States, we have Tariq Ramadan in Europe. These are Western academic scholars. Tariq Ramadan is also classically trained. Now, what I mean by that is when you go to Cairo or you go to a university in which you actually study Sharia, then you are a specialist of that area and that area alone. My lectures on Islamic law, to be completely honest, they take up 3 hours, and kids are dying through it because they're like, oh my God, it's so hard to understand. But there's so many like different parts of Islamic law and different jurists, and what you end up doing is basically you go to school and you specialize in one area. It's like lawyers. You specialize in divorce law, for example. And then if you want to go and get another PhD, then you go into a higher category, which is this like a general school, like a madhab. And a madhab is a school of thought. Then you master that. And if you go higher than that, which I don't know anyone who has, except for maybe Suyuti, and I think it was like 15th century, then you can specialize and become a well-known scholar, but we have no such thing as a pope. So we have many scholars that like do divorce law or things here and there, but an actual authority is something that Islam lacks. We don't have an actual authority to give that title to anyone.
So it's more dynamic, and
It is.
and is it hard to? But it seemed like there was pretty universal agreement as to like how is there a universal agreement as to how a caliph is chosen?
So for a caliph, let's say all Muslims in the whole wide world actually went to the ballot and elected this person and voted for Abu Bakr, whatever, then he is elected. Like, in accordance to the law, you give your bay'ah, and bay'ah is allegiance. And what's a form of it today? It would be the ballot box. But you have to give your allegiance to this person to even get any credibility. And, I mean, ISIS did that to this Abu Bakr guy, but nobody else did.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry. One more question. So basically, it seems like this ISIS or ISIL, whatever the name, is pretty much either ignorant of Islamic law or disregarding it or reinterpreting it, or...
I think they're abusing it, because this letter to Baghdadi that I showed, if you just Google it and you read it, they go through every single thing that ISIS is doing and how it is actually breaking Islamic laws. And to be honest, the general public, like if I did a survey right now in this room and asked Muslims, what is Islamic law and what is Sharia, the honest answer is they don't know the difference between the two. Like, majority of the Muslim population doesn't. The only reason I do is because I did my master's thesis and I was like, I don't know the difference between the two, and my professor pretty much made me do it. So, like, the general public does not know that information. And the one thing I was talking to other Muslims about is I think we need to be classically trained. We need to go back into that field because we have the best doctors. Like, medical schools are filled with Muslims. Engineering programs are Muslims. Law schools are Muslims. I definitely think we need to go back to the field of religious studies and Islamic studies and have a bigger voice within that.
Thank you.
Could I just add something there? Before coming up this afternoon, I was, as I said, I was watching C-SPAN, and I was listening to Somali imams from Minneapolis, along with the law enforcement of Minneapolis-St. Paul that's working with the Somali community. And they listed a number of things that characterized the young men that have left Minnesota and gone to fight with ISIL. And one of the key characteristics that was listed was the feeling of disconnect with the religious leaders and the religious scholars that these young men have. One of the things I think that's compounding the difficulty, and you're saying going back to the classical period, is that ISIL is in a sense the child of the internet. And on the internet, on various sites, you have people who are not religious scholars, who are not do not have the credentials, who are presenting certain texts out of the Quran, misinterpreting them, and but saying it with great authority. And so, I think, as an outsider, I think there is kind of a crisis of authority. Young people are on the internet more than they are going and reading serious Islamic scholars, and as any religious group knows, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, anything's allowed on the internet, and so this is a dangerous age. It'd be much easier if we could say all young men, because young men are the ones that seem to have the impulse control problems. All young men in all religions need to have a mentor who's a bona fide leader, scholar in our tradition. We can't mandate that.
I did also want to add that depending on just like there are certain really good Sunday schools and really good Saturday schools, Muslims sometimes also go to Sunday schools. And my education did teach me the difference between Islamic law and Sharia principles. But I understand that there are other schools that maybe did not do that. So it's a process. Muslims are, relatively, it's funny, we are the newcomers, right? We're new to, number one, Abrahamic religion. We are the most recent, as well as in the United States. So I think, aside from that also, for instance, the way my parents learned about Islam was in a version of a Sunday school, but it was more Monday through Thursday, and it was 1 hour a day. So it depends on once again, if your parents sent you to Sunday school, if your parents sent you to that school. So you will see a difference in knowledge in Muslims, just like you would in different other faith backgrounds. So one last question. We have time for one more question, and I see a hand right there. It's behind you, Joshua.
My heart today continuously is I've learned new information and reading about history of the Sunni and Shiites is this heartbreak that at one point in history they did intermarry and that they lived in the same neighborhoods and there wasn't this horrible catastrophe that's happened. And the perspective could come from either one of you, but especially, I want to say your name right. Ayesha. Okay. I whispered it, but you still heard me because it's a big microphone. Okay. So what do you believe happened where these people who did intermingle and got along and maybe had different views but still intermarried, what power came over them where this now is the response? And I know it's many layers, but when I think of our own culture in America, I see like an underlying heartbreak and suffering of the African American culture and white people, and I see that some overpower could come and say divide and be diversive and go against each other, and that horrifies me in our country. And so you coming from a different perspective, do you see the same, it's not necessarily coming from within us, but it feels like it's coming from somewhere else, and I just wonder your perspective on that.
So when we look at Islamic history, one of the things that we realize is the Sunni-Shia split didn't happen until much later. And it happened much later because, so you have the general majority, right? And then you have political unrest. And when you have political unrest and people coming and taking over your land, you get harsher with the minorities, and minorities are Shias, and they are women. And if you look at the history of any nation, like look at the incarceration rate of African Americans in this country. Look at the 1,700% rate that I mentioned about Muslims in this country. So when there's political unrest, and just reading a few books of Islamic history, you see that when there's political unrest, one of the main things that happens is minorities, and within that, it's women. They're treated really roughly. And one of the texts I would really recommend reading, and it's such a fast and easy read, and I prescribe this for my students every semester, and they love it. It's Raza Aslan's No God But God. It's a really fast read. It doesn't even feel like you're reading a history book. It's like a lovely story with a few really nasty things that happened. But that's really the bottom line of that.
We could take one more question. I know I saw a hand right there in the middle. Joshua. Right there.
You had mentioned that that ISIS is not funded, donor-based funded. How are they funded?
My understanding that I probably didn't mean to suggest that there are no donors, because we know that there are, but that they have a more sophisticated business plan. And so, for example, the example that I gave of taking over the oil field and continuing to have the oil flow rather than destroy it creates revenue for them. Some of these people that are coming to join the group are coming from Western countries and bring funds with them. Some countries, as we know, have paid the ransom for those that have been kidnapped, and that's a source of income. Again, I don't know about I don't know for sure about the organ harvesting issue. ISIL is, as far as I heard within the last month, is either contemplating or has begun to create its own currency. I do believe in some horrific way that if they were on the stock exchange, there'd be a lot of people investing. They know what they're doing. They're very smart. They have a different recruiting campaign for certain parts of the world to others. Just as President Obama was speaking today, and he's giving a message that's hard for us to. We want an instant military solution to ISIL, and we want him to do it now. And the reality that he knows, and I think he's exactly right here, is that America could do a horrendous intervention in some way that would be militarily successful in the short run, but would increase the recruitment of ISIL for decades to come. When Peter Kasich was executed, the message that was given to the United States was directed to Obama. Basically, it said, we see him not as a humanitarian worker, we see him as a soldier who had been in Iraq and had served the American purposes, and the end of the message was, we want American soldiers to come back to Iraq. We want a piece of you. So we have to be careful in our tradition of being the policeman of the world, but we don't have really a lot of credibility in different parts of this area. And so, you have this, I'm drifting a bit from your question, but just to say that this, I believe, is a more formidable organization than Al-Qaeda was. Really more formidable. I'm more of I have a good friend, Turkish scholar, who said, "Oh, I don't know why you take these people so seriously," and that was what he said about six months ago. And now we can't go, a week without realizing that story's changed, and it's changing in front of our eyes. So I am not obviously aware of all the ways that they bring in money. It's just it's a more sophisticated way of doing it than Al-Qaeda ever dreamt about.
Now with that, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. However, our speakers will be sticking around for a few minutes, or you could send an email to us at www.desmondtutucenter.org, and on the contact us section, send us your questions, and I assure you we will send them to these speakers. With that, please give our speakers a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Please visit us again next Tuesday for Reconciliation with Native America right here in this building. Also, we heard about mass incarcerations, which is going to be one of the topics we will be discussing next Thursday at Clues Memorial Hall with legal, law enforcement, and government experts. So please make sure you join us. Then March 3rd, we're going to have Jeremiah right here at this Sheldon Auditorium. You can find the Desmond Tutu Center's full list of programs out here in the hallway. Please make sure to sign our sign-in sheet so you can get our newsletter. We also have copies of our January and February newsletter that you can pick up. And also for those of you on social media, please follow us on the Tutu Center and use our hashtag DTC Talks. Thank you.